The Retroid Pocket Nova might be the answer to many people's question of what is the best D-pad top 4x3 aspect ratio handheld. It's about a PlayStation Portable size and width, but then much taller, and it packs quite a punch since it has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor that we've seen now in a multitude of different devices over the years. That does mean that performance is an afterthought rather than a worry. All of the 4x3 systems are handled here and upscaled, so no problems or concerns when it comes to PlayStation 2 or GameCube or so on. The Retroid Pocket Nova is priced at $239 US. It went up $10 since it launched a few days ago. But this is for the 8GB RAM, 128GB storage model, with a variety of different colors available to you, or a 12GB RAM model for $30 more. Shipping has already started, so you can grab one if you want, linked in the description. Yeah, that's right, it did go up $10 already. Retroid's excuse is Qualcomm raised prices. Find that hard to believe, but whatever. It went up $10 from $229 to $239 before it actually even shipped in like a week period. It's a weird thing. Anyways, there's a 12GB RAM option. It's not worth it. There is no real scenario where you need 12GB of RAM on a 4x3 aspect ratio device like this one. Even with HD texture packs, it's just not necessary. So just save the $30, spend that on accessories. Buy a grip, a case, whatever you want. It's gonna be wasted on this device to go 12GB of RAM. Right off the bat though, we have to talk about the screen because that is the most important part of this specific handheld because it's the selling point. It's what everybody's here for. This is a 4.5-inch AMOLED 4x3 aspect ratio, 1280 by 960, 120Hz display, which was custom made for this device, and it is also a native landscape panel. This is the major feature. It is for people that want to experience 4x3 aspect ratio with no black bars on the sides, minus the bezels that they put there on colors like crystal, and that thicker bottom bezel for whatever reason, but also those that want a D-pad top experience to go with it. When compared to a comparable 16:9 handheld with a 6-inch AMOLED 120Hz screen or 7-inch screen, like the AYN Thor, AYN Odin 3, or the AYN Odin Portal, which would be the 7-inch option, this means the Retroid Pocket Nova has a similar experience to the 6-inch screens with just a 0.1 inch of an upgrade for 4x3 content if you're integer scaling, or it loses quite a bit to the Odin 2 Portal, of course. And all of this changes quite a bit if you aren't integer scaling, as all three of the other handhelds have a better 4x3 coverage than the Retroid Pocket Nova. That does mean that anybody with any of those three devices would have a similar or better experience for 4x3 content than the Retroid Pocket Nova provides. It really goes to show you how much of a great value the Odin 2 Portal is at $269. Nothing can beat it. But the Retroid Pocket Nova's screen is good, with one negative. I've noticed lower response times while gaming, which could be due to the native landscape display or something else. I don't really have the proper tools to measure it, unfortunately, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. The screen can get bright-ish to 500 nits, but that is below the AYN Thor and Odin 3's 550 nits, and way below the Odin 2 Portal's 800 nits. It is more than enough for inside use though. The 120Hz feels great in games, and there is the usual benefit for 60 FPS games at 120Hz to feel that lowered response time and latency and better frame pacing, and just an overall smoother gaming experience. Especially when you compare it to 60Hz panels. There's a night and day difference there. I also measured this to make sure that we are getting the proper 60Hz and 120Hz at both modes, and we definitely are, which is good. The one big negative to the screen though is the saturation or the colors. The display is embarrassingly oversaturated to the point where cheap IPS displays at like a third of the cost are displaying more proper colors in comparison. Handhelds that really should have no business being anywhere near an OLED in any sort of conversation. But even the other devices that we talked about earlier with AMOLED screens like the AYN Thor, Odin 3, and Odin 2 Portal show how much of a big difference this is. There is a lot of detail lost on the Nova's screen that is just present on pretty much every other handheld. For a handheld where the actual display is the selling feature, I was a little confused at this because that would be the one thing that you'd want to point to and be like, that's amazing, that's why I'm buying this. But that isn't the case with the Nova, unfortunately. I do hope that that's something that can be fixed in a future update, but I'm not too sure. It's weird that this can't be considered the best 4x3 screen device, especially when compared against IPS screens like the Anbernic RG476H and 477M, 477V, which I would probably say are better than this. That being said, the negatives aside, playing 4x3 games on here is a wonderful experience. If Retroid can solve the display, I think a lot of D-pad top 4x3 users will have a great time with this device, and it should take up the mantle as the one true king of 4x3 devices, rather than what it is currently when it compares to an Anbernic device. So if that's your specific niche, this is going to check a lot of boxes. Like I mentioned before, power isn't an issue here, so you can just play through the entire PlayStation 2 catalog, minus the few games that have issues, at 2x, which is the screen display ratio, and you'll have a great time. And it's the same scenario for GameCube games, which absolutely no performance issues to speak of, and they look and play great here. This processor has long since been solved, since this is like the 100th device with a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor, so we know what to expect here when it comes to performance, and you could find any game on the internet to know how it performs. I will say that I don't love it for 16:9 usage. I find the screen to be a bit on the small end, and I think that 16:9 suffers quite a bit if you plan on playing any of those systems or any content that's 16:9 on this device. But I also don't think that anybody buys a 4x3 device to play 16:9 content on it. At that point, you'd probably just grab a 16:9 device and it excels at that, and then you would also excel at 4x3 content, which is why I keep going back to the 16:9 devices and how well they play 4x3 content in comparison. I'm still not a big fan of the actual design of the device. I wasn't when I saw it, and I'm still not a big fan of it when I see it in person. Compared to the Retroid Pocket Mini, which was the predecessor to this, and there's a whole long story about all that and how that came to be to get the Nova, and it all starts with fraud, but don't worry, we got $3 off for that fraud. But I find this design to not be as good or compelling as the Mini was. And as somebody who enjoys glass fronts, I find that that's probably what's missing here, or something else. The Nova looks out of place when in this price range you have a lot better looking devices in comparison. And it's the one that looks like it's a under $100 device that is somehow in a mid $250 price range. It feels like a fish out of water when it comes to the design. That being said, Crystal does look really nice here in person. It's the only color that I have, and I have to say, I actually like it quite a bit. So Crystal is good to me. Jumping over into another category, and let's talk about cooling and the fan. There is active cooling here, and like the display, there is great to talk about and then a big negative again. The great is the actual fan noise. When it comes to the sound of actual air being pushed out, this is one of the best handhelds that I've heard. The air noise is pleasant, not loud, and it's great. However, that positive is completely ruined by a very big negative, and it is the whine of the fan. Or to be more specific, it's the frequency of the noise that is present at all modes, quiet, smart, or sport, whenever the fan is on at any point. This is a frequency that doesn't bother everybody. Doesn't annoy everyone, but it is something that extremely bothers me. It's one of those things that you can hear from a room away. It's that tinnitus frequency type noise. This is present on all models, all fans, and I've heard it in every review of this device. Now, all of that being said, you don't need the fan. You really don't. I turned it off day one, and I spent all of my time, all of my testing, all of my games on this without the fan on. Upscaled PlayStation 2, upscaled GameCube, some Game Hub and all of that for PC emulation. It gets warm at the back, but never too hot. So it's a scenario where the fan is a real big issue, but you also don't really need it. So it's kind of a moot point at the end of the day. It does unfortunately turn itself on when you charge the device. It's kind of like a safety feature, but you can get away with not needing to turn the fan on depending on what you're playing. For everything that I tested, it seemed fine. It'll get a little bit warm and all of that, but it was fine. So let's talk about controls next, and this is where I had kind of hoped for better. The D-pad on my Crystal is stiff, and it doesn't feel like previous Retroid devices do, which I have always liked. The AYN Thor has a very pleasant D-pad, nice movement, not stiff, and I find it great. The Nova's D-pad in comparison has, I want to say, sharper edges, but I don't think that's the right word, as it's not really cutting me, but it does feel like it's less finished, if that's a better way to phrase it. The D-pad movement feels restrictive, and it's probably one of my least favorite features of the device, which is a weird thing to say because D-pad top is one of the selling points of this device. The buttons themselves feel fine, there's travel, they are clicky, and they're not silent, and otherwise they feel like you'd want normal buttons to feel. Shoulder buttons are clicky, but you can push them at any spot and they register, so that's really good. The triggers do have a lot of range, although they hit 1.0 way before they should. It's about halfway to the end. That could be a good or a bad thing depending on the person. Sticks on the bottom isn't my favorite, but I think for most people using this device, you're using the D-pad first. I do find that it is a bit of a cramped experience, especially for scenarios like Super Mario 64, where you're trying to use the shoulders and triggers plus sticks and buttons all at the same time, and I've never been somebody who enjoys sticks on the bottom. So stick-heavy games haven't felt good on the Nova, but that's something that I kind of expected going in. I think offsetting them a bit more, like the Retroid Pocket Mini had, would have helped, but that isn't the design that they went with, unfortunately. Speaking of the design and the sticks, they made a weird decision regarding the LEDs on the sticks because they're now angled instead of a cross shape. So turning on LEDs will be a personal preference type thing for many of you if you like it or not on the transparent type devices. Overall, when it comes to the comfort of the device, I'm a bit mixed to negative on it. I find it's cramped if I ever want to use the triggers, as the spot where your finger rests is the hardest spot to push down on, and so you kind of feel your finger curling to actually touch the trigger. I like to hold my handhelds closer rather than flared out, and so I had a tough time getting comfortable with this device over my time. The weight feels great though. It's nice and light, and you don't feel much heat in the hands, which is what you want. I want to say that this needs a grip, but that kind of defeats the purpose of a smaller device, so I don't know where I land on that one. Normally, when I talk about a grip, I don't like having it be necessary. On bigger devices, it's fine because the grip's not going to change anything. It's a bigger device. On a smaller device like this, if you have a grip, it might change the whole point of the device because at that point, you just stick with a larger device. It kind of turns it into that. But I do think that this will benefit from a grip or the back body that they have as an accessory, which unfortunately they didn't send to test, but it's back bumps on the back, and it might be a good option to check out, but I don't know. On the speakers front, they sound fine. Speakers are a touchy subject as pretty much all of the devices in this price range have needed EQ adjustments to sound better, and this doesn't escape that. It's serviceable out of the box, and I expect that EQ adjustments with something like James DSP will make it sound better, but this won't be an audiophile's favorite device. Your hands do tend to cover some of the speakers depending on how you hold the device. I personally haven't run into that issue with muffled sound or anything really, but I do think that with how people might hold this device, that could be a concern. On the battery front, as always, I do full 100% to 0% tests, no guesswork in the numbers, and so I tested ARM SX2 at a 2x resolution running Dragon Quest VIII. 100% brightness, 10% volume, LEDs on for an essentially almost worst case scenario, and I left the fan off because of reasons I mentioned earlier, and so I saw 5 hours 15 minutes as the final time. That is actually really good. I don't really have concerns here. With the fan on, it might be a different story, but I find that to be really good. I started to do a Super Nintendo test, and I saw that it was going to be over 15 hours or so while I was doing it, and so I stopped it. Long story short, battery is great, you don't have to worry. Let's start to wrap things up here, and I think the biggest question for anybody that hasn't been sucked into the FOMO of this device is, who is this for? And it's a bit of a complicated answer. I would honestly throw this into the niche category. This is for users that really want just a 4x3 screen and D-pad top. In a world where most users at this point have purchased an AYN Thor, AYN Odin 3, or quite literally the best Android handheld on the market at $259, the Odin 2 Portal, there is no real reason you would want to buy the Nova if you have any of those devices. We talked about it before, but it is a 0.1% improvement to the screen switching to the Nova for integer scaled 4x3. But you lose all of the benefits of a 16:9 device. And that is many upon many, plus all of the concerns that I have with comfort, D-pad, screen, and so on. So unless black bars are really bothersome to you, it would be a weird decision to move from one of those devices to this. And if there's a decision to be made between the Nova and one of those devices, I would lean towards any of those because I prefer better compatibility over a narrower device, especially in the $240 price range. That being said, if you love 4x3, you want a 4x3 screen and you want D-pad top, this is the device for you. Everything else aside, that is the person who should be buying this device. That is your niche, that is what you like. It's great. There are alternatives that we've talked about a little bit before, the Anbernic RG 476H, 477M, 477V. The colors on those screens are going to be better, and those screens are no slouches either, but they're not OLED. So it depends on how much you want that OLED over IPS and all of the benefits that come there, which should have been better picture, although that isn't the scenario here, unfortunately. I think if you're worried about anything that I mentioned today, you might want to wait for updates just to see how it all shakes out. Retroid is really good at updates usually, but I don't know how much of today's issues can be fixed over the air and how much is just a hardware thing. So hopefully you can keep an eye on that and see if it's something for you. Let me know in the comments below. Are you going to grab a Nova? Why or why not? I would love to know as well if you're switching from any of the devices that I mentioned to this one, what's making you switch? And are you changing your decision at this point? There's a lot to like about the Nova, don't get me wrong. I just find it a little bit more niche and weird in scope and the price range, and there's a lot that is negatives that you wouldn't expect from a device that should be the crowned king of 4x3 devices at this point, especially from Retroid. It's a weird decision. That's going to be it for this one. Don't forget to like and sub to help the channel grow. Come join me on the Discord to talk all about retro gaming, and hope you all have a good one.